إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. Dear brothers and respected sisters, the Prophet ﷺ has advised us of how to live our lives and how to prepare for the hereafter as well. And the Prophet ﷺ has also forewarned about certain situations, certain circumstances that certain people will have to go through on that day of judgment. And people will have various concerns. One of those that the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned is that the sun will be brought down and that people will be drowning in their own sweats according to the level of their sins. That some may have their maybe up to the ankles, some maybe up to the knees, some maybe up to the waist, some up to the neck, some completely drowning therein. But the Prophet ﷺ has also mentioned that there will be 7 groups of people who would have done something that is so beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not only just save them from that punishment, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them the honor of granting His shade to them on that day. That they will be in the shade of His arsh. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned who those are. In a hadith, Sahih Muslim, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu mentions, the Prophet said that سَبْتٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. That there will be 7 groups of people whom Allah will give shade on that day when there will be no other shade except for His. And then the Prophet mentioned the 7 categories. Said, إِمَامٌ عَادِلٌ وَشَابٌ نَشَى فِي عِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ وَرَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ ورجلان تحابا في الله اجتمع عليه وتفرق عليه. And ورجل دعته امرأة ذات منصب وجمال فقال إني أخاف الله. ورجل تصدق بصدقة فأخفاها حتى لا تعلم شماله ما تنفق يمينه. ورجل ذكر الله تعالى خاليا ففاضت عيناه. Also mentioned these 7 groups of people, and I want to just focus on one of those groups that the Prophet mentioned, and that is that رَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. That person whose heart is tied and is associated, is connected to the masjid. That person whose heart is connected to the masjid, that person will be one amongst the people whom Allah will give them shade on the day of judgment. And it shows that the importance of having that love and value of the masjid in a person's heart. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, he explains and he says that this hadith shows that it is necessary for a person أن يحب المساجد ويؤثر الصلاة فيها فلا يكاد يخرج منها إلا ويتوق لرجوع إليها. That a person has the love of the masjid, a person has the desire to pray his salah within the masjid, that a person that he can barely leaves the masjid except that he looks forward to when he will come back to the masjid. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, in his explanation of the hadith in his commentary on Muslim, mentions that in the hadith is an encouragement for building of the masajid, for visiting the masajid often, for praying therein. And Imam Nawawi mentions that it also shows that for a person to love the masjid is a sign of a person's iman. That is a sign of a person's iman for them to love the masjid. Why? Because it is on account of that Allah will give them shade on the Day of Judgment. And it's understandable. It is something understandable because a person likes his own home, a person likes his house, where we say there's no place like home. That if a person likes his own home, a person likes his own house, then the masajid, these are the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In a hadith in Sahih Muslim, Abu Hurairah mentions that the Prophet said that ahabbul biladi ilallahi ta'ala, that the ahabbul biladi ilallahi masajiduha wa abghadul biladi ilallahi aswaquha, that the most beloved of places to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are his homes, his masajid. And the most disliked of places to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the markets, the shops, the malls where people are heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are places, the masajid, that are places of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of doing worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a form of various other good deeds, the reciting of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. That these are places that are beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because of that, on account of that, the Prophet ﷺ has also mentioned several different rewards for coming to the masajid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. For example, one hadith in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet mentioned that man tatahhara fi bayti thumma masha ila bayti min buyuti Allah ليقضي فريضة من فرائض الله كانت خطواته إحداهما تحط خطيئة والأخرى ترفع درجة. That a person who makes his wudu, makes his ghusl from home, comes to the masjid for the sake of fulfilling his fard, then for every step that a person takes, right, wherever you parked in the parking lot and you're walking all the way to the masjid, for every single step, the Prophet mentioned that one of them removes sins and the other one elevates ranks. For every step there is a reward. Either with one step it is the removal of sins, and with the other step it is the elevation of ranks. And because it is a special place, there are certain etiquette that must be followed therein in terms of how we come to the masjid. The Prophet, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rather, mentions that Ya bani Adam khudhu zinatakum inda kulli masjid, right, that we're supposed to come to the masjid in a dignified manner, that there is certain etiquette in what we do at the masjid, that the purpose here is to be in the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we cut out unnecessary talk and such, that وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. Allah also mentions that masajid are solely for the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his ibadah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions فِي بُيُوتٍ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ أَن تُرْفَعَ وَيُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ يُسَبِّحُ لَهُ فِيهَا بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ. That in his houses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that they be raised, and there's different tafasir on they be constructed, they be cleaned, there's different tafsirs of it. And these are places where he's being glorified. And all of this arises because a person's heart is attached to the masjid. And alhamdulillah, we made the effort in Ramadan to come to the masjid, and something that is an effort that should continue post Ramadan as well. But this is a place that is the place of the gathering of the Muslims. At the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also appointed a special day and a special time that we are not simply encouraged, but a segment of our community is required to come to the masjid. And that is Jumu'ah. And why Jumu'ah? The Prophet mentioned that because it is the best day of the week. In Sahih Muslim, Abu Hurairah mentions, the Prophet said, خَيْرُ يَوْمٍ طَلَعَتْ عَلَيْهِ الشَّمْسُ يَوْمُ الْجُمُعَةِ. The best day on which the sun rose was the day of Jumu'ah. That فِيهِ خُلِقَ آدَمْ. That's when Adam alayhi salam was created. وَفِيهَا أُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةِ. That's when he was entering into Jannah. وَفِيهِ أُخْرِجَ مِنْهَا. And that's when he was taken out from Jannah. And وَلَا تَقُومُ السَّاعَةِ إِلَّا فِي يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ. And the day of judgment will not be established except on the day of judgment, or except on the day of Jumu'ah. And it is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He could have simply commanded us that this is something we must do, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is that He then also gives us rewards and encouragement for doing it as well. Abu Hurairah mentions that, for examul, Salatul Khams wal Jumu'ah ila al-Jumu'ah kaffaratu lima baynahunna. That one prayer to the next, one Jumu'ah to the next Jumu'ah is a means of forgiveness of sins. And we're encouraged to come to Jumu'ah, but not simply just come, but come early. The Prophet mentioned that man ightasala yawm al-Jumu'ah thumma raha faka'annama qarraba budnah. That person who makes ghusl from home and then comes to the Jumu'ah and comes early, then it is as if the person was going to get the reward of sacrificing an animal. And وَمَنْ رَاحَ فِي السَّاعَةِ الثَّانِيَةِ فَكَأَنَّمَا قَرَّبَ بَقَرَةً. Then someone who comes a little later, still before the khutbah, but relatively a bit later, then that person has the reward of sacrificing a cow. Someone who comes a bit later, وَمَنْ رَاحَ فِي الثَّالِثَةِ فَكَأَنَّمَا قَرَّبَ كَبْشًا أَقْرَنَ. Somebody then will have the reward of sacrificing a ram. Someone who comes a bit later, فَكَأَنَّمَا قَرَّبَ دَجَاجًا. It's as if they get the reward of sacrificing a chicken. And then someone who comes a bit later, then the reward of sacrificing an egg. And then when the khutbah starts, then فَإِذَا خَرَجَ الْإِمَامِ حَضَرَتِ الْمَلَائِكَةِ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الذِّكْرَ. When the time for Jummah, the khutbah starts, then that's closed. And now the angels will sit and they will listen to the khutbah as well. And the Prophet has also warned of of people who will miss Jumu'ah. It mentions that أنا سمعت الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم, the narrator Abu Hurairah mentions that I heard the Prophet say that لا ينتهين أقوام عن ودعهم الجمعات أو لا يحتمن الله على قلوبهم أو لا يكونن من الغافلين ثم لا يكونن من الغافلين. That I warn people to stop missing Jumu'ah, otherwise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause a seal to be placed on their hearts and they'll be written from amongst those who are from the heedless. Okay? And alhamdulillah, we have come to Jumu'ah, but this is a reminder for not just ourselves that it's important for us to come to Jumu'ah, but also for those of our youth, those who have reached the age, they've become baligh, but they're in schools, that Jumu'ah is a fard requirement on them as well. And it is responsibility for us, toward our children, that we make sure that there is an arrangement for Jumu'ah in their schools as well, that they're not missing Jumu'ah, that they're not missing this fard act that is on them as well. And when we come for this fulfillment of this obligation, then there are certain directions Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that when we come to Jumu'ah, that when it's time for Jumu'ah, then rush. Leave everything else. Leave everything else and rush toward Jumu'ah. That we are to leave all the matters that pertain to the dunya, we're supposed to leave them. So much so that certain things that may seem like they're acts of good, the Prophet mentioned that even them, for example, he said, إِذَا قُلْتَ لِصَاحِبِكَ أَنصِتْ وَالْإِمَامُ يَخْطُبْ فَقَدْ لَغَوْتْ. That on the day of Jumu'ah, we're supposed to be listening to the khutbah attentively. That even if a person does something that seems like an act of good deed, which is you tell somebody, hey, just pay attention, shh, be quiet. The Prophet said, even that, which may otherwise seem like a valid, good advice, the Prophet said, even that is going to be considered as heedless talk. That even that is not allowed during the khutbah, a person should be paying attention. And Allah also mentions then in Surah Al-Jumu'ah that فَإِذَا قُضِيَتِ الصَّلَاةُ, when the salah is finished, then go out. Go out and seek from the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abundantly, that when the salah finishes, then we can get back to our work, then we can get back to our other responsibilities, whatever we may have. And some of the Sahaba, even radiallahu anhum, and some of the elders would say that there's actually a lot of barakah in transactions post-Jumu'ah. It's mentioned about Iraq ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, that he would go out right after Jumu'ah, and that he would make the dua and say, Allahumma inni ajabtu da'watak, wa sallaytu faridatak, wa antashartu kama amartani, farzuqni min fadlik, wa anta khairul raziqin. That he would go out and say, Ya Allah, I have fulfilled your commandment, I have come to Jumu'ah, that I've done what you have told me. So now Allah mentions that, Wallahu khairul raziqin, so then now you give me that rizq that you have promised. And when we come for Jumu'ah, it is also a requirement that we remove all distractions. Once initially, Jumu'ah was such that the khutbah used to be given after the salah, like it is for Eid. And at one incident, the Prophet, they had prayed, and he was speaking, he was giving khutbah, and the caravan of Dihya al-Kalbi radiallahu anhu had come from Syria. And his caravan had a lot of essential food stuff. There was a time of scarcity. So then people rushed out because they felt that they're going to miss out, or they felt that, well, we already prayed, so then let's go now. So they went, and only a few people were left remaining. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then addressed this in the Quran. And He says, وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً أَوْ لَهْوًا انفَضُّوا إِلَيْهَا وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا قُلْ مَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ خَيْرٌ مِنَ اللَّهْوِ وَمِنَ التِّجَارَةِ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الرَّازِقِينَ. That when they see transactions and such, then they go out, they're distracted by those things at the time when you are speaking. And He said that, that they're not supposed to do this, and what is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is better, and Allah will provide them rizq thereafter. The Prophet mentioned that had everybody gone out, Ibn Kathir mentions this in his tafsir, that had everyone gone out, there were a few that remain, But the Prophet said, had it been that everyone had went out, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have sent down a fire that would have covered the valley of Medina as punishment. That when we come for Jumu'ah, that we are to remove the distractions from us. That would be our phones, that would be the people that may be next to us, whatever. We put those phones as silent. That notification can wait, that message can wait, that those things can wait. This is a time when we're not even meant to even give any good advice to each other. So I remind myself and I remind everyone else that it's important for us that our hearts be connected to the masjid, that we make an effort to come to the masjid. And when we come to the masjid, there's a certain etiquette of the masjid. And we're especially encouraged, and for a segment of the community, we are required to come to the masjid for Jumu'ah. But when we come to the masjid for Jumu'ah, then there's certain etiquette and certain requirements there as well, including the fact that we ensure that we are listening to the khutbah, the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as mentioned in the Quran, and that we remove any distractions, and that we do not, we're not looking at our phones, we're not talking to people, and anything that will take our focus away from the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must be removed. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for myself and for everyone here, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it such that our hearts are connected to the masjid, that we receive that shade of His on the Day of Judgment, and that we receive all the rewards, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to fulfill all the commands with His proper etiquette. وأقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على سيد الرسل وخاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله وصحبه الذين اجتبى ما بعد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الله ملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداءك أعداء الدين. اللهم انصر المسلمين المستضعفين في كل مكان. اللهم انصر المسلمين المستضعفين في كل مكان. اللهم انصر المسلمين المستضعفين في كل مكان خاصة في غزة يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر المجاهدين الذين يجاهدون في سبيلك في كل مكان. اللهم اشفنا واشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين. اللهم ارحم أمواتنا وتقبل شهداءنا. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله يذكركم ودعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقيموا الصلاة.